Coming up, we'll have the latest unemployment numbers, what's gone so wrong with the CARES Act and what comes next in CARES Act number 2, some advice on where to turn for help, and I'll have some thoughts about our most vulnerable workers dying for minimum wage. That and more as Labor This Week begins now. Hello, I'm Mark Harrison. An additional 6.6 million U.S. workers filed for unemployment last week. And with a revision upward of more than 200,000 for last week's numbers, we have now seen an increase in total unemployment claims in a 3-week period of nearly 17 million. The national unemployment rate is now 15%, an astonishing number, given it was 3.5% less than a month ago. With one economist saying the economy has fallen into a black hole. Indeed, the nation's gross domestic product, a measure of the total of goods and services produced, could fall as much as 35% for the second quarter of this year. Now, prior to this morning's news, many analysts had been saying that the real unemployment numbers were at least 1% or 2% higher because many are unable to actually file claims for unemployment insurance. It has taken the economy just 3 weeks to do what it took 2 years to do during the last recession. Some are predicting that as many as 20 million workers could find themselves without work within the next month or so, while others are saying we could see double that amount. And no one really seems to know for sure. And as we now find ourselves deep in uncharted territory, the only thing to do is stay informed. There's much more ahead on Labor This Week. We'll be back in a moment with a look at how the CARES Act has so far failed to deliver for most Americans. Two weeks ago, the CARES Act was signed into law by the president, and so far it has failed to deliver on almost all fronts for those in immediate need. Some people seeking relief from their mortgage payments in the form of forbearance are being told that they will need to come up with a huge lump sum payment when forbearance ends. And this, of course, is not the idea behind forbearance. Others do seem to be allowing the payments missed in forbearance to be simply tacked on at the end of the mortgage. Of note, Congress and regulators specifically told lenders to allow homeowners to defer payments if they have been hurt financially by the COVID-19 outbreak. Turning to renters, they are often the most vulnerable folks in a financial crisis, and there is no specific relief for them. This is a real hotspot right now, with some landlords trying to work with tenants and others steadfastly refusing to do so. Now remember, landlords have no real financial backups yet, as the small business loans are only available for forgiveness if workers continue to stay on the payroll through June. And speaking of small businesses, the terms of the loans they can apply for are fairly specific. The business must use the money to keep employees on the payroll or to hire back those already let go. However, while many businesses are trying to take advantage of the loans, most are saying they can't seem to get traction in the application process. The federal government, rather than making the loans directly, has directed the process to come through the banking system. But so far, the banks say they have received little or no guidance on how to handle the loans. Meanwhile, those currently out of work who could possibly find themselves rehired wait without income. Indeed, the Trump administration seems to have stumbled right out of the gate, with the first son-in-law finding himself in the middle of the mess. Indeed, late Monday, President Trump removed Glenn Fine, chairman of the federal panel Congress created to oversee his administration's management of the $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package, because he apparently wasn't doing a very fine job. Or maybe just because the president hadn't fired anyone for a couple of days. Elsewhere, Secretary Mnuchin has been accused of getting between the airlines and its highly unionized workforce by telling the airlines the government wants a stake in their companies if they take the monies allocated to them from the stimulus plan. AFA-CWA president of the Flight Attendants Union, Sarah Nelson, has, as usual, been carrying the water on this message for the rest of the airline unions, as she has appeared on several news programs trying to alert anyone who will listen. It is no secret that the transportation unions are the big guns and that any union activists would absolutely love to break them once and for all. Bear in mind, we have seen 2 unionized airlines cease to exist in the last week alone, and those jobs will never come back. Additionally, on the anti-union front, legal firms representing managements are actively and openly discussing the idea of invoking force majeure or act of God to unilaterally void specific clauses in union negotiated contracts. And Trump-nominated and Republican-led Senate-appointed NLRB General Counsel Peter Robb has suggested that unilateral layoffs at unionized workplaces has some preference. What many are considering a wink and a nod to corporations to take the fire them now and let them sue us later approach to laying off workers. We'll be back after the short break with new proposals coming out of Washington to shore up struggling workers. You can find out more about the Labor Network by visiting thelabornetwork.com and by following us on your favorite social media outlets, including Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Stitcher. While the administration, and all of Washington for that matter, struggles with the unprecedented financial crisis enveloping the nation, talk of an additional economic package has taken center stage. Indeed, the president has floated yet another infrastructure bill, something he's been talking about since 2016, but Senate Republicans just hate the idea of putting Americans to work fixing up our roads and bridges and building exciting new projects that hint of new Green Deal. Enter the White House and Congress, who are quickly coming to terms with the idea that we are going to need a whole lot more than the $2 trillion already allotted. Conversation began at $1 trillion, but sources say to expect that to head north to at least $2 trillion, like we saw last month. Talks are solidifying around additional monies for households and more corporate aid and more money for the overwhelmed healthcare system. And while there is some political agreement on issues, differences remain. I know. Hard to believe, right? With the unemployment rate probably much higher than what was being reported just this morning, if last week was any indication, Washington needs to come to terms rapidly because the rate of burn for the first stimulus package is much higher than was anticipated a mere 2 weeks ago. On the Democratic side, House Speaker Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Schumer are calling for hundreds of billions for hospitals and state and local governments and food stamp recipients on top of the president's request for $250 billion for small businesses. That $250 coming on the heels of the first $350 billion already in the pipeline for small businesses. An amount that, if the banks and government can get their acts together on, the loan process promises to quickly be exhausted. The White House wants this all passed by tomorrow, Friday, but Congress is out of session and the whole thing is about to get real complicated because the Democrats have a bit of an edge here if they hold fast on reconvening Congress in a highly infected Washington that many lawmakers will be loath to return to for health reasons. The usual mouthpieces are out in force, with Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, calling Democrats shameless by not helping small business, and Pelosi and Schumer saying in a joint letter that urgent action is needed to protect lives and livelihoods. We'll be right back after the short break with some helpful information on where to turn. From coast to coast, the federal government's SNAP program, that's the former food stamp program, has been increased to its maximum for families, which means as much as an extra $240 a week for some. Much like unemployment, the program is federal, but it is administered through your state. Google it or help someone who doesn't have access to a computer or the internet by looking for SNAP, S-N-A-P. Now, you will receive a card, not unlike a credit card, in the mail to use for food. So far, the program has been pretty responsive. There are also a vast number of food banks popping up everywhere, and they are heavily taxed, heavily being utilized. So contact local charities and churches for further assistance. The food banks are quickly becoming overwhelmed, so those who can help to either work at those locations or donate food, please do so. Also, very often the volunteers at food banks are older folks, so those of you out of work who have some energy and a face mask might consider helping out. Some hotels and restaurants had initially given food stocks to area food banks, but we all get hungry every day, so keep those donations coming in if you can afford to. For those who still need help with unemployment, Google that one as well. Your computer will, in most cases, know where you live, and you will see your state's local contact information. Phone lines are proving almost impossible to deal with. People report hanging on the line for hours and then being disconnected. So apply online if at all possible. Going there in person is not a good idea for health reasons and because most offices can't staff or choose not to. Remember, apply for benefits in the state where you work, not where you live. And that's important to remember for some of you who live close to state borders. It will take several weeks to get unemployment, and the amount you will receive varies depending on your state, time of employment, and how much you previously earned. Remember, the Federal CARES Act stipulates that $600 will be added to your unemployment checks, but that money will also come from your state. Now, you will be expected to look for new work, and you will have to comply with certain proofs of employment and residency. Follow the forms online, and again, look to help those who have the need for computer assistance. In addition, you will be getting $1,200 if you earned less than $75,000 previously, and your check will be based on either your 2018 or 2019 taxes, depending upon your latest filing. $2,400 for families earning under $198,000. If you haven't heard yet, if you are a Social Security recipient, you will automatically get your $1,200 payment in the mail or directly deposited. Your federal taxes can wait to be filed until July 15th as of now, and any federal tax you owe will be forgiven until then as well. The states are still kind of thinking about it in most cases, so you'll have to just wait and see what your state does. Finally, if you need help paying bills, you must talk to your creditors. The mortgage companies have been directed by Congress and federal agencies to allow forbearance of all FHA-insured mortgages, but you must talk to them. So you are going to have to get on the phone in the waiting line and wait your turn. You can't just stop paying. They have been instructed to take your word, but you will eventually have to prove a loss of income due to the COVID-19 virus. Also, for car payments and credit card payments, while those creditors have not been directed to offer help, most have shown a great willingness to work with you. So again, get on the phone and take the wait. Don't just stop paying them. You're just sitting around watching Netflix anyhow. So hop on the phone and hit the pause button on the remote when they finally answer. As an aside, the mortgage companies have been directed to not make any derogatory remarks against your credit. That's important. However, the other creditors will be making it up as they go along. So do yourself a favor and try to make that same deal with them. And very important here, get it in writing. Derogatory credit can remain a burden for up to 7 years in some cases. All right, I'll be right back with some thoughts about the disgusting ways we are treating our workers during this emergency. Folks, if you are like me, over the years you've done a lot of household projects. Paint, papering, sanding, other things. Most of them get done, some of them don't. Well, I just want to pass something along. This is a mask I found, and it's an N95 mask. It was downstairs in our basement near an area where I keep all the things that I've done all these projects over the years for. So just as a public service announcement, go down, rummage through the basement, rummage through the garage, rummage through the crawl space, the attic, wherever you keep those old paint supplies and household supplies, because quite possibly you might have a mask and it might come in handy. This is actually in a package of 2 that had never been opened, so I wish you luck with that. Thanks. In New York, 41 transit workers have died from the coronavirus and more than 6,000 have been sickened. In California, at nursing homes, workers are afraid to go to work because they lack the proper protection to keep themselves safer. And at one home, after 35 out of 80 of the home's residents have fallen ill, they have just refused to go to work. A grocery worker in Maryland has died, as have 2 Walmart workers in Chicago. Amazon fired a worker who led a strike for safer working conditions. And a doctor has been fired in Washington State because he spoke out about the lack of protective gear available to frontline workers at the hospital where he worked. 2 flight attendants, one for JetBlue and one for American Airlines, have died. And a naval captain, whose crew considers him to be a hero for placing their interests first, was relieved of duty for making public cries for help for his men. We stand at a crossroads in America. For 50 years, the rights of average working people have been in decline. Wages have been stagnant. and the right to speak out about safety concerns have been dismissed by major corporations and small businesses alike. Not all of them, to be sure. There are some solid companies whose leaders have a conscience and hold the belief that worker respect should find its place alongside profits. Still exist, but they are in the great minority. We have seen heroes emerge in the crisis, not the least of which are our medical professionals who find themselves on the front lines of this crisis. Those speaking out are heroes. Those taking the lead as worker advocates and leading their fellow employees out in protest of better safety conditions are heroes. Right now in California, hundreds of cooks and cashiers at 50 fast food restaurants across the state are on strike, demanding that McDonald's and other fast food chains provide masks, gloves, soap, $3 an hour hazard pay, and 2 weeks of paid sick leave to workers exposed to COVID-19. Why should they have to ask? Why? For 50 years, we have been convinced that our enemies walk among us. For 50 years, we have been convinced that the color of our skin and the lands of our origins and the deities that we worship divide us. But right now, we are all dying without regard to those things. For the last 50 years, those that sit above us in palatial offices have worked in Washington using their money to work against us, all the while convincing us that the reasons for our discontent sit to our right and to our left. But now, we are all suffering the same. But more importantly, we are all finding out that we have common needs. And maybe, just maybe, when we get on the other side of this, we will take the lessons we have learned to use them to our advantage by working together with each other. We are the majority. And just like on the playground when we were kids, the majority rules. Be safe out there. I'm Mark Harrison for Labor This Week. I'll see you next week.